The world is shifting faster than anyone imagined. In the heart of Africa, a young, fearless leader emerges from the shadows, commanding loyalty from millions and defying global superpowers. To the east, a silent giant awakens, strategic, patient, and relentless in its pursuit of global influence. And in the west, confusion, resistance, and a slow unraveling of control. This is the story the world's media isn't telling you, of how a little-known African president has captured the attention of Beijing, sent shockwaves through Washington, and is now rewriting the rules of global power. This is the new power triangle: China, Traoré, and Biden. And right now, America is losing control. But how did we get here? And what does this mean for the future of the world's balance of power? The rise of Traoré, Africa's unexpected power player. In 2022, few people outside of West Africa knew the name Ibrahim Traoré. A young, bold army captain who seized power in Burkina Faso amidst growing instability. His rise was unexpected. His vision revolutionary. He wasn't just fighting extremists. He was fighting corruption, colonial influence, and a decades-old system that had turned African nations into economic pawns. He did the unthinkable. He expelled French forces from the country. He nationalized key industries. And then, in a move that stunned the geopolitical elite, he turned to China. Enter China. The Silk Road snakes through Africa. China's strategy has always been long-term. While the West focused on sanctions, lectures, and military bases, Beijing built roads, railways, and power plants. Across Africa, China has poured billions into infrastructure. But its investments come with quiet expectations: loyalty, access, influence. When Traoré took power, China saw opportunity. A leader with a strong anti-Western stance. A nation rich in gold, uranium, and rare earth minerals. And a new partner ready to say no to the West and yes to a new era of South-South cooperation. What followed was a rapid alignment. Economic deals, security agreements, and closed-door meetings in Beijing that left Washington alarmed. This was Biden's dilemma. The West loses its grip. Meanwhile, in Washington, panic. The Biden administration had spent years rebuilding trust in Africa after the Trump-era neglect. But now, they were losing ground to an unexpected alliance. Burkina Faso, a small landlocked nation, and China, the world's most potent challenger to American hegemony. American intelligence warned, Traoré is not just a local leader. He's becoming a symbol of defiance, a symbol of multipolar resistance, a symbol that Africa would no longer bow to the West. And Biden's team didn't know how to respond. Do they punish Traoré with sanctions? Do they attempt diplomacy? Or do they risk letting China take full control of West Africa? The triangle deepens. The secret deals, strategic alliances. Behind closed doors, something deeper is happening. Sources in Ouagadougou whisper of intelligence sharing between Chinese operatives and Burkinabe security forces. Chinese drones now patrol northern Burkina Faso. Mining contracts once controlled by French and Canadian firms are being handed to state-owned companies from Beijing. And America? They're watching from afar, powerless. This isn't just about one country. This is a domino. If Traoré succeeds, others may follow. Mali, Niger, Guinea, all flirting with similar anti-Western ideologies and cozying up to China. It's a geopolitical landslide waiting to happen. The silent war, media, minerals, and militaries began to rage. You won't see this on CNN. You won't hear it in U.S. congressional hearings. But the battle for Africa is underway, and it's not being fought with tanks. It's being fought with infrastructure loans, satellite access, and media narratives. China funds local news stations across Africa, subtly shaping the narrative. The West failed you. China builds. Meanwhile, American influence fades, one African capital at a time. And all the while, Ibrahim Traoré becomes more than just a president. He becomes a symbol of a new African identity. Proud, independent, and connected to Beijing, not Brussels or Washington. The world reacts: NATO, Russia, and the global balance. The implications reach far beyond Africa. As the U.S. loses influence in Burkina Faso and beyond, NATO's southern flank becomes vulnerable. France is humiliated. Russia quietly watches, even applauding Traoré's defiance as it eyes its own strategic inroads in Africa. We're no longer in a unipolar world. We're not even in a bipolar one. This is the age of shifting alliances, of unpredictable power triangles. And at the center of one of the most dangerous triangles yet are China, Traoré, and Biden. The question isn't if this triangle will redefine global politics. The question is when. Because for every Chinese-funded road in Africa, for every mineral contract shifted eastward, and for every African leader inspired by Ibrahim Traoré's defiance, America's global influence slips, inch by inch, day by day. The world is watching, the stakes are rising, and the power triangle is tightening. Will America wake up before it's too late? Leaked memos and whispers of war. Just when Washington thought things couldn't get worse, they did. A leaked intelligence memo, stamped eyes only, circulated quietly among the top brass in the Pentagon and the CIA. The subject line was simple but chilling. Africa is slipping away. Within the document, analysts described growing hard evidence of Chinese private military contractors training local defense forces in Burkina Faso. A satellite image attached to the report showed a Chinese-built military complex just outside Ouagadougou, complete with drone launch pads, radar systems, and encrypted communication hubs. Even more shocking was the suggestion that Traoré had authorized a long-term defense pact with China, bypassing both the African Union and the Economic Community of West African states. The West, it seemed, had been completely blindsided. But how? The answer, whispered in intelligence circles, pointed to a network of African digital surveillance systems, built and maintained by Chinese firms. The very communications channels American diplomats once used in the Sahel may have been compromised all along. The Petro-Yuan Gambit, a new monetary war. While the world focused on soldiers and speeches, a quieter but more devastating revolution was underway. Currency. For decades, the West dominated African trade through the dollar and the euro. But now, under Chinese influence, new trade deals were being inked in yuan. Burkina Faso began accepting payments for gold exports in Chinese currency. Other nations started to follow suit. Mali, Chad, Niger, Guinea. It wasn't just symbolic. It was systemic rebellion. This shift threatened to dethrone the US dollar in one of the world's most resource-rich regions. And it wasn't just economic, it was political. Because if the dollar falls out of favor in Africa, America's global influence shrinks with it. Wall Street noticed. So did the Federal Reserve. But the White House, still struggling to build a strategy, still treating Traoré like a fringe figure, not a central chess piece. A movement is born. Inside Burkina Faso, something deeper than politics was unfolding. It was cultural, spiritual, ideological. The youth hailed Traoré not just as a president, but as a symbol of liberation. Murals of his face appeared in schools and stadiums. Songs were written. Military uniforms now bore patches of the continent, not colonial borders. And Traoré himself began articulating something the world hadn't seen in Africa in over a generation. A clear, bold doctrine. Africa will stand. Africa will unite. Africa will never be owned again. His speeches echoed across borders. From Dakar to Kinshasa. From Niamey to Bamako. He was no longer a local leader. He was becoming the ideological axis of a Pan-African resistance movement, with China as its silent sponsor. Biden's quiet panic and the coming reckoning. Back in Washington, the silence grew deafening. Biden's advisors were split. One camp argued for direct engagement, a surprise presidential trip to West Africa, a new trade package, maybe even military support for anti-jihadist coalitions. The other camp pushed for containment, targeted sanctions on Chinese firms, blocking IMF loans to Traoré's government, and expanding AFRICOM operations in neighboring countries. But Biden, aging and cautious, hesitated. Every delay allowed Traoré and China to move faster. And the American people, distracted, tired, focused inward. By the time the National Security Council finally proposed a regional counterstrategy, it was too late. The African Alliance for Sovereignty had already been formed, a bloc of West African nations, unofficial but deeply coordinated, refusing Western interference and openly inviting Chinese investment. It was a rebellion cloaked in diplomacy, and it was winning. The power triangle wasn't limited to Africa. Its effects rippled outward, fast and wide. In Latin America, populist leaders saw in Traoré a template. Reject the IMF. Embrace China. Control resources. Defy Washington. In the Middle East, Gulf nations began hedging, pulling investments from U.S. markets and redirecting them into the Belt and Road Initiative. Israel and Saudi Arabia, traditional U.S. allies, opened silent channels with Beijing, watching Traoré's rise with clinical interest. The signal was clear. The world was no longer afraid of choosing sides. Because the old side, Washington's side, was losing its edge. Will America strike back? Now, Washington faces an impossible choice. If it tries to confront Traoré directly, through sanctions, covert destabilization, or military pressure, it risks galvanizing the entire African continent into open defiance. If it ignores the power triangle, it risks being erased from key global decisions, locked out of resource markets, trade routes, and political alliances for a generation. Some in the Pentagon whisper about a strategic realignment, even forming backchannels with Russia to block China's rise in Africa. Others suggest a new Marshall Plan, this time for Africa, offering development, jobs, education, and partnerships. But the time for subtlety is over. Because every day Traoré stays in power, every contract he signs with China, every speech he delivers to his people, is a day America loses leverage. And so, a new map is being drawn, not with tanks or treaties, but with influence, symbols, and systems. In one corner, China, rising and relentless. In another, America, hesitant and divided. And at the center, a young African soldier, now a president, whose fire and fearlessness have shaken the world. The triangle is complete. The rules have changed. And the game is no longer America's to control. This is more than a political drama. It's a shift in the world order. From dusty deserts in West Africa to the marble halls of Washington and Beijing, power is being redrawn. And if you think this is the end, it's only just beginning.